Let me ask you a question. If you had a band, what would you call it? Some friends of mine once tried to set up a band called Pascal's Wager. I heard them play once, and I have to say the name was the best thing about them. Blaise Pascal was a 17th century Frenchman, a philosopher and mathematician. He invented an early calculator and wrote a lot about the laws of probability, which he then applied to the question of how people should live. And what he wrote became known as Pascal's Wager. Pascal argued that as it's impossible to know for certain whether God exists or not, the choice we all make about our eternal destiny is essentially a guess, a wager. And so, like any gambler, we should weigh the probable consequences of winning or losing the bet and act accordingly. So what are the consequences? Well, Pascal argued that if the Christian God doesn't exist, there are no consequences. Death is the end for everybody. And so whether you choose to believe or not doesn't really matter, because you're no worse or better off either way. But if the Christian God does exist, then Pascal argues the consequences of living as though God doesn't exist are huge. You miss out on an eternity of joy in heaven and instead face eternal separation from God in hell. And based on those two consequences, Pascal argued that the rational thing to do was to live as though the Christian God does exist. Because if you're wrong, you're no worse off. And if you're right, you're infinitely better off. So there you have it, Pascal's Wager. Now, Jesus had something similar to that in John chapter 11. He was at the funeral of a man called Lazarus, speaking to the dead man's sisters. And he said, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die." And then he asked the people who were listening to wager on whether he was telling the truth or not. He said, "Do you believe this?" Now, if this time of COVID has reminded us of anything, it's that uncomfortable fact that even with the best medical care ever and wonderful people caring for us in our communities, we will all eventually face death. We'll all face the consequences of that wager that Pascal talked about. What we believe about life beyond death really matters. So this week of Lent, why not prayerfully take some time to think through how you would answer Jesus' question? Do you believe him? And are you willing to bet your life on it? Thanks for listening.